Hey guys, did you know that right now we're giving away over 2 hours of professional compositing training for free? All you have to do is sign up for our newsletter and we'll send you a free detailed tutorial on how to make this image from start to finish. Also, you'll never miss another video as we'll send you regular updates whenever we bring out new content. So please go and check it out at bigideaedit.com/newsletter. Hey guys, my name is Toby and welcome back to another very exciting Photoshop tutorial where today we're going to be talking about how to do professional skin smoothing using a technique called frequency separation. And this is a brilliant technique because it gets around one of the big problems that most other skin smoothing techniques suffer, and that is that they effectively require you to blur the skin in some form or another. And when you blur the skin, you get rid of all of this lovely natural detail that automatically exists in someone's skin texture. And I think that's a bad thing, because if you do that, if you get rid of every little pore and every little hair, people stop looking real and they start looking a little bit plastic. And it stands out as a photoshopped image from a mile away. If you ever had one of those sort of instant cameras with a skin smoothing filter, it basically just blurs it and it just looks rubbish. So what is the answer to doing this properly? Well, that is with this lovely technique, as I mentioned, called frequency separation. So in order to do this, the first thing to note is that this is something that you want to do quite late into your workflow. This should be pretty much the very last thing you do to a photo, with the exception of sharpening. Sharpening should definitely be done after this, but everything else you really want to get out of the way before you attempt this. So as you can see, I've done some cloning and a few other things here. Any color edits you want to do that before you do this. And that's kind of the best way to tackle this, in my opinion. So now that we're kind of in a situation where we're ready to go ahead and use this technique, we actually want to create a flattened copy of this group. And I don't actually want to flatten this group because I might want to come back to it later and change some things. So the easiest way to do that is to create a stamp visible layer. And that is by pressing Command or Control if you're on the PC, Alt, Shift and E. And that is going to basically make a flattened copy of that group as a new layer. So now that we've got this, we actually need 2 copies of our layer. So I'm going to press Command or Control if you're on the PC and the letter J. So now we have 2 versions of this. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and rename these layers. Now you don't have to do this, but it might be helpful. And you might see why in just a minute. So I'm going to call this one Color. I'm going to call this top one Detail. So what we've now got, or what we're now going to do, I should say, is we're now going to separate out the color information into one layer and the detail information into another. And this is going to allow us to work on those 2 aspects of our photo independently without ruining one or the other. And that's quite a powerful thing to do, especially when it comes to smoothing out skin. Hopefully you can start to see where this is going. So first things first, we need to get rid of all of the detail information from our color layer. So I've just turned our detail layer off for a second. And we're going to do this by using a blur. So we're going to go up to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. Now, the amount of blur is going to depend on a few things. It's going to depend on, first of all, the size of your image and also how much detail there actually is to get rid of in your particular photo. So there's no set value for this. You kind of have to play it by ear. But the guidelines I'll give you are basically, it needs to be enough that you can't see any of the texture in the thing you're trying to get rid of. So in this case, I can actually still see a load of skin texture here, so this needs to be a bit more. But what you want to avoid is something that looks like this. This is too much blur, because the object or person or whatever it is still needs to be recognizable as that thing. So you kind of want it to be somewhere around there is pretty good. Yeah, I think that'll be okay, because now on the skin, and again, we're not looking at her hair because I can still see some detail there, but we're really just focusing on her skin here. I can't really see any detail. It's just kind of smooth sort of blobs of colour, and that's perfect. But you can still see that's a person. It's not just an unrecognisable blob. So we're going to hit OK, and we now have a blurred layer. Now, in order to do the opposite, and we want to just kind of save the detail information in this layer but not the color information, we're going to do something which on the face of it is a bit complicated, but fear not, you might just want to note down a couple of numbers here to save yourself some time. But basically we're going to subtract this layer from this layer, which, because this is now blurred, it should in theory just leave us with the details. But the way we do that is by making sure that we have the detail layer selected. You go up to Image and Apply Image, and you'll get this little dialog box here. So what we want to do is we want to basically say this layer, we want to apply it to the color layer, and this is why it was important to name your layers, because there's a good number of layers here. So we want to make sure that we're applying it to the color layer. RGB is fine, and then the blend mode needs to go to subtract. So we're basically saying take this away from this, and we end up with just the detail information. Now, why I said you need some numbers, this is actually automatically plugged these in because this is these are the numbers that I used the last time I used this effect, but you need to make sure that it's a scale of 2 and an offset of 128. And the reason for those numbers is beyond me, if I'm totally honest. Somebody far more intelligent than I am came up with those, but this is how this technique works. Now, it's going to be these numbers for any image that you work on. This is always the same. You could quite easily create an action to do this bit for you if you don't want to have to remember the various numbers involved, but it's always these numbers, and if you've done it right, you should get something that will look like this. So what we've now got is a mostly grey picture with just kind of the details and texture in it from the other one, and we're going to go ahead and kind of recombine these in a way that it looks basically, it should match up and be exactly the same as the image we started with. So I'm going to go up to our blend mode of our detail layer, and I'm going to go to linear light, and now we are back exactly where we started with. So on the face of it, nothing has changed at all, but we've got a little bit more work we can do to make this now start to actually smooth the skin out. So we want to select our color layer, and then we want to select our lasso tool, or which is keyboard shortcut L. And before we start circling things and selecting things, we need to make sure that we actually feather our selection. So I'm going to put this up to about 15 or 16. Somewhere around there is pretty good. It doesn't have to be too accurate, as long as it's soft on the edges. So that's basically what this does. It doesn't really seem like it does anything, but it's just going to mean that my selection now, if I just quickly select something here, if I hit Q to go into quick mask, you can see that it's actually got a soft edge on it. So that's basically what that's doing. But what we want to do is now select sort of, you want to look for shapes in the skin tone and colour. So I can see there's a highlight there and there's a highlight there. And you also want to avoid any major features, so things like eyebrows, eyes, all that sort of thing. And just make a rough sort of selection around there. So I've got this part of her forehead here. Now I'm going to go up to Filter, Blur, and I'm going to go to Gaussian Blur again. Now, this time, you kind of just want to start, you want to make sure preview's ticked, and you just kind of want to move this around and get it as smooth as you can do. And I would say do it more than you think you should, but what you want to avoid is where it starts to go dark around the edges like that. You want it to do it so it's still kind of, it still blends with the original, but you're getting away with as much blur as you possibly can. So I think somewhere around 55 is going to be okay for this image. And again, this is going to vary depending on exactly what you're doing. So I'm going to hit OK, and then I'm going to hit Command D to deselect, or Control D. And that doesn't seem like it's done very much, but hopefully you'll see in a second. So now I'm going to select this highlight, and I'm going to press Command F. And in this instance, that's a little bit too much. By the way, Command F will just reapply the same filter with the same settings that you just did. So it might be that I got a little bit too close to her hair there, maybe. Command F. No, it's just a little bit too much. So I'm going to go back to Blur, Gaussian Blur, and we'll just bring this down slightly. And somewhere around there. Okay. And basically, you just kind of want to go around the rest of the face and do the same thing. So kind of mess that up. Let's grab a little bit more there. Get a little bit closer there, I think. There we go. And we'll go, I think we need to, I think it's just because that was that highlight was a little bit strong, so I think we do actually want a blur of about 50 pixels in this particular instance, so we'll go for that. Hit OK. And then we'll do this bit here under her eye, and you'll notice that I'm avoiding that line there because that's quite a strong feature on her face compared to sort of a lot of these other areas. So we'll just hit Command F a couple of times there. Sometimes you can sort of double up on these if they aren't coming through strong enough. And just make sure you're kind of refining your selection grabbing sort of all of these key areas and just smoothing stuff out. It's really good actually sometimes if you've got like a hot spot on someone's face. If you kind of do this a couple of times, it will really start to kind of smooth out that hot spot. So just there I had to kind of reselect a little bit, because if you kind of go over an area like this, it will start to have this kind of smoothing effect, and that's because you're trying to blur. If you think about what we're actually doing, you're blurring this dark bit with this bright bit, and it's kind of trying to average it, so you don't want to cross over too much where there's a big tonal difference. We'll just grab this area here. Anything that's dark like this, so this area of sort of detail just here, you can actually reduce some of the contrast there. So like I say, because it's blurring those two colours together, you can actually just do this a little bit, and that's just gonna bring that up a little bit more. And we'll do across the top of her lip there. There we go. And we'll come, oh, wrong tool, there we go. Go back to our lasso tool, and we'll just do a chin down here. And you'll notice I'm not being like particularly precise with any of my selections here. It is very much a case of just you know, kind of just go around it and make sure you kind of get most areas on the face. So there we go. Now it doesn't appear to have actually done quite that much, and that's because this is quite a subtle technique. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to group these two together, and we're just going to not do that. We're going to rename this Freak Sep. And now if I turn this on and off, you can kind of see before and after. So if we just zoom in a little bit here, you can see that has really done quite a lot to just even out all of the skin tones, but all of that detail has stayed completely untouched just because that's how this works, and it is rather good. Okay, so one of the reasons why I like to do this and not include this bottom layer, so we've actually still got our untouched original starting point for this tutorial down here, is that when you put them in a separate group like this, you can actually now, if you feel it's a little bit too strong, you can dial back the opacity of this group, and you can start to kind of bring in some of the originals just to make it a little bit more natural. And it does become, you know, quite a subtle effect, but I think it's still a very, very powerful, and it just helps people look a little bit more flattering. It just softens up the skin tone a little bit, softens up the face a little bit, and overall I think it's a great technique. So I think that is going to do it this time, guys. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Toby, and we'll see you next time.